Often people would ask members of the Sangha community at the time of Lord Buddha as to what is the sasana all about, the Buddha's dispensation, his teaching. What is it all about? What is its essence? And Lord Buddha gave a very concise, very short, palatable, easy to comprehend type of an answer that encapsulates everything about the Dhamma in such a succinct, short, little way, but so deep at the same time. He presented it in three prongs, or in three phases, if you will, three waves. Not to do anything that is harmful, or evil, or bad. To do what is good, what is wholesome, and to purify the mind. So beautiful, so elegant. Years ago, I was presented with a definition for elegance. I don't remember where it was, but the person, from what I recall, saying it, put it this way. To take something that is so complex, so complicated, and so having so many layers to it, and to make it or present it as so simple, something so palatable, easily to comprehend, that is elegance. Something so complex, but appearing to be so simple, equals elegance. That is something that impacted me very much years ago when I heard that. But when Lord Buddha is saying not to do anything evil or unwholesome, to whom? For whom? Well, we first start with ourselves. Something that is evil or bad or unwholesome, all of which we consider a thing to be done to us, landing upon us in our lives, having these qualities, we don't like. And to take that and to project it also to the world around us, to have the same attitude, to have the same expectation, if you will, for everyone else, not to be experiencing any of that evil, any of that bad. Because the moment we are actually paying attention and protecting ourselves from anything that is bad, we also begin to expect that for the world around us. This gets embodied within the Sila structure of the three trainings, a very foundational part of the practice of the dispensation. So not to do anything that is harmful, not to do anything bad. No one can argue with that. You can go to any culture in the world, any part of the universe. If extraterrestrials or other beings were to show up from different dimensions, and they have no clue about the Dhamma, if you sit down with them and somehow communicate, when we present them with our own approach, our own philosophy of life, if you will, our spiritual path, and say, well, it comes in three parts: not to do anything that is bad or harmful. Okay, to whom? To myself and to everyone else. They're not going to argue with that. They bow to that because it's a universal value. The second one is to do what is good, what is wholesome. Again, to oneself and to everyone else around us. Because there cannot be a separation. My happiness cannot exclude you and your happiness. It's impossible. Happiness is everywhere. It's like the rain. When the rain falls in an area, it doesn't have preferential treatment of, no, that leaf I'm not going to drop the rain upon. I'm not going to wet it with the delicious, juicy, oxygen-filled raindrops. Everywhere else, yes, but I'm just going to keep that area dry. Or the sunlight. It's the same approach. And this is at the core of Brahma Viharas that we practice. Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha. Loving kindness, compassion, altruistic or sympathetic joy, and equanimity. These four allow our consciousness, our awareness, our capacity to widen, continuously widen, expand beyond any borders imaginable. And every time I look at you, I need to see my own happiness or my own suffering if you're encountering those experiences. That's why we don't see that lining, that border, that separation line between you and I. That's why the Brahma Viharas are so powerful, starting with metta. If they're done in conjunction with penetration through wisdom. That's why metta can take you all the way to Nibbana. We don't just practice the Brahma Viharas for the feel-good, leftover emotional state that it gives us. Otherwise, it's just another high. Otherwise, it's just a samatha practice or some type of a jhana. That is not doing metta justice or the Dhamma. So when we are looking at the second aspect of what the Dhamma is, the dispensation of Lord Buddha, to do good. And then we move to the third, which is purifying the mind. How can anyone debate that? How can anyone belittle its value? If you've ever cleaned up your apartment, your home, or the area where you live, the more clutter, the more stuff, furniture, things you have, dirt, whatever it may be. And when it gets cleaned up, that space, you have reclaimed that space. Excuse me. The effect of that is going to be equally powerful in the sense that you had such a saturated space with stuff, and now there's none. It's just spaciousness. The mind is no different, the way I see it. We have to navigate through so much When we see each other, we don't see each other. We're seeing our concepts, we're seeing our thoughts, we're seeing our feelings, we're seeing our fears, we're seeing our expectations, our projections. People get into relationships with people, but actually they're getting into relationships with their ideas, expectations, fears. What often is called baggages. We don't want to be in a relationship with a person with a lot of baggage, we say, but we're carrying our own container loads of baggages. And so are the other people, of course. What does that tell us? The mind is not cleared up of all the junk. And that is why we practice meditation. That is why we are practicing becoming aware, first of all, that the mind is not so pure. And that's why, again, we practice sila. So not doing any harm or good or evil to anyone, doing good and purifying the mind. That is the teaching of the samana, the great samana, the great teacher, the great recluse, Lord Buddha. Okay. Do you notice a common denominator in all three phases, three aspects, the three prongs? There needs to be sati in every single one of them. If there's no sati, you will not know heads from tails of what it is, the nature of the thing that I'm doing. I'm thinking, I'm saying. That's why it's essential for us to have sati. You're not going by what someone else has said. Don't do this. That's like a commandment, which in our Western culture, we're very familiar with that, the 10 Commandments, etc. And it always leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Don't do this. So it's an outside in enforcement. It's not natural, ultimately. However, when it is induced from the inside, it has an intrinsic value for the person versus an extrinsic where someone else nods and says, good boy, you did well. Yes, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. That is not mature attitude when it comes to living a virtuous life. Ultimately, at least from the position of the Dhamma, when viewed. But when we're practicing sila, there is an ownership. The very first requirement of ownership is becoming aware of this role that we occupy in this activity, be it a mental activity, verbal activity, or physical, bodily activity. And the good news is, if we are able to establish sati, even on a very basic level, it will be permeating, reflected in all the three aspects of what the sasana is. It will be there when we are about to do something evil or unwholesome, something that will bring us or somebody else harm. Sati will be there to tap us on the shoulder and say, excuse me, don't do that. The same thing will happen when we're about to do something good, or we weren't even thinking about it. We had the options in front of us. We were standing at the fork in the road. Suddenly sati comes and says, oh, by the way, we could go ahead and take that route, which we normally do, or we can go ahead and take the other route, which we rarely have done, and do something good for somebody else, just to put a smile on someone's face. Pay a compliment to someone. It's so easy once we're doing it. But if the person is about to do it and never done it, it becomes like a chore, like climbing Everest. But the more the person does reach out of their comfort zone and tries out what it feels like for me to have somebody experience what I normally would love to experience myself, suddenly wonderful things happen to the brain, to the body, to the mind. And it lasts such a long time. Such a long time. I once witnessed, as I was sitting correcting papers when I was a teacher at a high school, I was at a coffee shop somewhere, and there was a gentleman who was sitting there, and he had ordered some things, sandwich, whatever, tea, coffee. And I noticed the waiter who came in. He said something. We were close, sitting pretty close so you could hear. And the waiter said, "That is a beautiful tie that he was wearing, a necktie." And I looked, and it was what I considered to be very bright and quite an elegant and beautiful tie indeed. Whitish gray, very ornate and colorful, very stylish. And I was, and then they were like just talking this and that, and just being sociable. And the waiter left with, having left the food there. So after a few hours, I noticed this man who was sitting close, he got up, and as the waiter was approaching to collect the plates and whatnot, I saw this man reach over for his necktie, and he loosened it up, and he straightened it and handed it over to the waiter. And he said, "That's a gift from me to you." The waiter was, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. No, I can't accept it." And he said, "No. My hand does not return back with the tie if I offer it to you. You will please accept this gift." That was such a beautiful moment to witness. And you should have seen the waiter's face, the smile. He was beaming, and he was smiling from ear to ear. Something so simple. So simple. Takes generosity, actually gives it three-dimensionality to what we call dana. I'm wondering if that person who gave the tie was thinking or reflecting on how would this other gentleman would feel if he were to receive the tie that he admired and paid compliments for. But even to ponder that, for the person to ponder, I wonder how this person would feel if I gave them this. That's going outside your comfort zone, isn't it? That's taking the other fork in the road, the other path on the fork in the road that is not normally taken for most people. But you need to be present. The person has to be present and mindful in order for them to really be moved by the gesture, by the action. And joy has this wonderful quality to it. And they were both joyful, by the way. You could see it in their bodily behavior. And I was watching the person as they left, the person who gave the gift, and they were beaming too as they walked and disappeared from my line of sight. What a wonderful, delicious moment for the universe to experience. A sense of togetherness. But joy also brings with it, right after joy, especially when we're talking about the 7 factors of awakening, it brings with it, right after, joy becomes intense and it settles, and then you have passaddhi, the tranquility. The mind becomes quiet. And that is one of the first phases of the mind showing you what it feels like when you empty out this room, which is a metaphor that I'm using for the mind that is no longer cluttered. That is the process of purifying the mind, the way I understand it. Imagine an ice skating ring, which can be quite huge, that had been full of boxes and things and furniture and chairs. You can't even see the ring. You can't even see how massive or how big it is. And then you cleaned it up. And now it's wide, expansive. And you're admiring it. But then you notice that in the middle of the ice skating ring, there's this small chair, a black little chair placed in the center. That ruins it, doesn't it? Still, because there is this clutter. But how does the mind see? How do we see that there is this? With the help of sati again. So sati is the underlying common denominator, which is an absolute must for us to have. And that's why the insistence on sati and sampajanya. You see, every gesture we make has to have a sati crowning it. Mindlessness or heedlessness, pamada, versus appamada in Pali. Heedlessness is like the leakage that the car gas tank might have. Even though it's a wonderful car, wonderful engine, and it can take us to wherever it is, however far it is, even if it's on the other side of the planet, if there are roads, the car would take us. That kind of a car. But there is a big hole somebody drilled into the gas tank. There's no way that the car will be able to take us. Maybe not even take us out of this our own city or road, neighborhood. Mindlessness or heedlessness or the lack of mindfulness, basically, is our enemy. And of course, they come in the form of hindrances. The hindrances. If there are the hindrances, guess what? There's no mindfulness. Plain and simple. You don't have to sit down and write a thesis or dissertation on, do I have a hindrance? Do I have this hindrance as you're meditating? If there is or are, there's no mindfulness. Now, the caveat to that is, this is how I like to encourage meditators. Interestingly enough, if there is or are hindrances around, and you become aware of them, at that moment of awareness, it means you have sati. So that is very good. That begins the process of purification for the mind. Purifying the mind. It's an active endeavor. We have to move the furniture out of the apartment, of the house, the junk, the dirt. We need to move them out. And that's why it's not going to fall from the sky, this thing called nibbana, or even awareness. Any of the stages of just purifying, whether it's through sila, whether it's through samadhi, or through paññā. It's so systematically, beautifully laid out by Lord Buddha. That's why Dhamma is incomparable. That's why we must protect it, not necessarily in books, but in our lives, in our hearts, because that is where the kileshas, the defilements, are. That is where the hindrances start from. Nowhere else. It's not coming from the outside. Don't worry. Hindrances are starting from right here. It's not metaphysical or, esoteric something. No, just basic. When you're having a vulgar thought, when you're having an unwholesome thought or desire to say something, where did that come from? Came from us. Came from us, from the heart. So you see, not doing what is evil, not doing what is good, and purifying the mind is happening all the time. It's not something like a good, catchy phrase that you could say in a party when someone asks you, what do you practice? Or I don't know. It's not like a quick, short soundbite of, yes, this is the Dhamma, leave me alone, type of a thing. No. This is happening all the time in the mind, in the heart of the practitioner, a true practitioner. That's why every gesture matters. Every gesture counts. But what gesture? What gestures am I referring to? Earlier during the meditation, when we reached that point where I suggested if you feel like it's time for you to move your body, go ahead and do a little bit of walking meditation. I also mentioned something, I think, about every movement needs to be like you giving up a treasure, something like that, to make every single movement. So for every movement, you're giving up that much. That's one way of looking at every gesture mattering for you. It's like you having been left with only a single coin, let's call it a silver or gold coin, with which you're going to go and buy food for your family, or medicine for your loved ones, for your mother, or for your only child, or for your partner. Just the last little coin left. How do you spend that? How do you spend it? Or the last handful of rice that's left on this planet, with which you're going to go and take it to your loved ones and give them food. How are you attentive to every single grain of rice so it doesn't spill, it doesn't fall through the cracks of your fingers? That is equal to what I'm trying to say, basically, of every gesture counts, every gesture matters. Can you bring that level of mindfulness to every single gesture you're making, whether it's a gesture of thought to yourself where no one else is aware of what's going on between your ears, whether it's speech, meaning even in its subvocal stage, where you're lining up the words and the context and all that, and you're about to shoot it out to the world. Hold on. Let's keep the gates closed for a second, and let's check the nature of these words that I'm going to let loose into the world. What kind of an impact is it going to have on the person, first of all, who's about to receive it? Is it going to leave them with a feeling of goodness? Is it going to destroy them? Lord Buddha called the tongue the axe in the mouth. The axe, the sharp axe in the mouth. Or is it something wonderful that I'm about to say to really change the mood of the person to something better? And if I'm about to do that, would I be lying? Am I making up stuff? So now we're gone deeper into the sila, and now we're applying wisdom, discernment for accountability. This is all accountability. Sati equals accountability, basically. I mentioned several times how I was born in Lebanon during the war, but I mean, and you see a lot, especially as a child growing up, things that, yeah, I mean, I could say children are not supposed to, but that would be an empty statement, not related with life much. But we would see on the news, or we would even see physically, I never held one, but I would see landmines, mines that blow up. And from movies and pictures, we've also seen in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, where you had jungles, hundreds, millions of acres of jungles that were strewn with, sprinkled with countless, equally incredible amounts of landmines. And many of them were not landmines for tanks or machinery. They were for people. Now, why do I bring this into this? If you could imagine how it might feel like for a person to be stepping in a field, into a field, knowing full well that there are landmines all around you, and you don't know where they are. There's no signage, there's no path that is safe for you to walk through. They're everywhere, and you and your luck, basically. Navigating with this mind of ours requires us to be as attentive as a person walking through a landmine. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's when every gesture really matters, because life depends on it. Just like that handful of rice that you were rushing to get to your family, to your loved ones to eat, the very last morsel, portion, handful of rice in the world. That compels us to become extremely attentive, mindful, heedful, appamada. We become so vigilant, protective. And you cannot have purification of mind without protection of the mind. You can't just flail your arms and run and rush and waltz through that landmine full of territory, that road. You can't just run through it carelessly, haphazardly. You know what's going to happen. But that is what most people keep doing. Our gestures don't matter, but they must. And that is, in essence, what is being said when Lord Buddha is giving that short instruction that the Dhamma is not to do evil, to do good, and to purify the mind. Basically, every gesture you make, you're engaged in, matters. Matters. And that's another name for sati. Sati. Sati is the doorway, is the path, is the pipeline, is the entryway for Paññā to come in. Paññā can never come without there first being the groundwork laid out by sati. Sati is so important. And no, not just, excuse me, not just when we're sitting to meditate, as you keep hearing me say again and again. There's a regalness, there's a beauty, there's an elegance. When you touch something with mindfulness, when you reach for your phone, when you reach for a pen to write something with, when you're reaching for the handles of your bike, when you are feeling yourself, when you're walking and you're feeling the clothes on your body, touching the skin in different areas. What is your relationship to that as far as awareness is concerned? Are you just aware of them? Or are you attaching stories to them? Meaning it's like that image of a few pieces of furniture in the middle of the ice rink or in the middle of your house that are not supposed to be there, like bags of trash that still need to be taken out. This requires us to do diligent work in maintaining sati. Every gesture matters. And when there is purification, it's not just for the sake of, oh, it's nice, it's pure, it's nice and clean, the mind is okay. No, it's not just that. There are levels of jhana where thoughts don't arise. For example, when a person reaches the 7th jhana, the realm of nothingness, there are no thoughts. It feels very weird. It's so calm, it's unnatural, quote unquote, for the person to be experiencing it. It's unusual. Something is wrong, basically. It's like you sitting in now in that room that's completely emptied out of the junk that was there for ages. You see the corners of the walls and it's now cleaned up and you're like, wow, I didn't know that exists. Oh, the walls, just pure white walls. Many people become very, if it's not balanced, if it doesn't have sati with it, which means there is the joint presence of paññā at that point, the person's mind starts to get agitated because they take the situation, the mind, the mental situation, to be somewhat unnatural, as I was saying. And they start introducing a chair, a pen, a desk, a book. All of a sudden, the room gets filled, and now they are more acclimated. That's more natural for them. So the reference I made to the jhana was simply to mention how those states are available to us if we practice. But even after you come out, you have to come out of the jhana. You can't stay there. So once you come out of it, the mind, if it's not being trained well enough with sati and paññā, that is why wisdom supersedes the jhanas. The jhanas will not take us to nibbana. Forget it. That's never going to happen. I mean, it was going on. 8 jhanas were there at the time of Lord Buddha. He was still practicing back in the day when he was a mere bodhisattva, Siddhartha, the ascetic. None of those 8 actually delivered release, liberation for the mind. Why? Because they lacked wisdom. So from the start, Lord Buddha has given us, you don't have to go into the jhanas. You don't have to experience the 7th jhana at all. You need wisdom. You can't have wisdom without sati. That's what I'm trying to say. These two really can clean up, can purify the mind, because wisdom can see and can also see the presence of hindrances, restlessness. That's the thing which agitated the mind, remember? And there was that calmness, and all of a sudden you want to introduce trash bags and furniture into the empty hall, empty room. Wisdom comes and says, it's okay, it's okay. It's okay. Let's go back to the meditation object. Let's go back. Let's let go of these expectations, it says to the mind. It starts to convince, coax the mind to relinquish, to abandon all these attachments, these projections that it has to things, attachments even to the Dhamma. And just to bring that sense of beauty and elegance into every single gesture you make, the way you wash your dishes, your utensils, the way you open up your eyelids in the morning. This is not something that you can get to only if you are a monk or living in some cottage or kuti somewhere in the jungles of Burma or Myanmar or somewhere in the world, or the Tibet. No, you could be changing the oil in your car and you're all dirty, but can you see, can you experience all those phases of the activity itself with alertness, but not being so extremely like on it and edgy. Some people might have an issue with the image that I was trying to share earlier with the landmines, because a person might feel very like, oh, is that the attitude? No. Remember the softness part? Forget about the landmine part. What is the mindset of the person? They are completely present. That's what the emphasis, where the emphasis needs to be placed. The mind. How do you cut a tomato on the cutting board? How do you cut it, especially with a very, very sharp knife? Especially if the tomato has to be chopped into very tiny little pieces, which means you have to go back in there again and again, which means there's a risk that you might cut yourself. If you're holding the knife very, very tightly, you're going to cut yourself. But if there's a softness, a looseness, not just in the wrists, you're still holding it nicely and firm, but the looseness of the wrist, the elbow, shoulder, how you're standing up, all these play a part in this. And that is what we mean by sila, the 5 precepts, or the 8 or the 10, whatever precepts you're taking on. That is also what it means by being aware of, being accountable for every gesture we make. Like those different parts of your arm being engaged in this simple act of cutting tomato. So I'm trying to present mindfulness in a way where it's doable. It is part and parcel of your life. It's not something that necessarily you do, something external, like the Dhamma is something external. No, ultimately, we need to bring it in and make it part of the heart, make it part of your life. Inseparable from the way you put soup. You bring a spoonful of soup into your mouth, how you digest, how you ingest it. Meditation is it's not separate from any of that. The way you brush your teeth, the way you go to the bathroom, the way you toss and turn in bed, the way you pull up the blanket over you. Some of the teachers in the past have mentioned how, in the case of monks, when they were dressing bhikkhus, these are very highly dedicated bhikkhus I'm referring to, giving these encouragements to the bhikkhus. Because unfortunately, the state of monastics in the sasana is not the best at this point. We have a lot of monks, but not enough Dhamma, and not, it's just a lot of superficiality, but not enough essence, not enough practice of the Dhamma. For example, the late Luang Pu Ben from Thailand, he would walk around the monastery and he would hear the bhikkhus. And the same goes with Ajahn Mun, Luang Pu Mun, decades earlier, his own teacher, decades earlier. And he would be shaking his head because he would have, this is Ajahn Mun, an arahant. He would hear nothing but snoring at night. Meanwhile, in his tiny little frame of body, he would be walking around and then sitting somewhere, whether it was in the jungle, whether it was in his tiny little kuti. He didn't have a massive monastery. He never cared for those things. He was a practicing bhikkhu. His teacher was Lord Buddha. He didn't have idle, teacher worship type of a thing going. His practice was his teacher. His practice of the Dhamma, it was one and the same thing. So he would look and see these monks. Some of them were not wearing their robes properly or putting on the robes with awareness, with mindfulness. That's what I'm coming to. Every gesture matters. So you had these teachers highlighting the importance of making sure that every tiny, minuscule activity is in fact not minuscule at all, as far as the Dhamma is concerned. Meaning, bring that sati with you, because you don't know, because that might be the junction point where it might happen, where nibbana can take place. If there's been enough sati, it's like tiny, tiny little chain links of sati happening throughout your life. And that is what is going to bring about nibbana. So Ajahn Mun, for example, would scold the bhikkhus the following morning, calling them names and saying, why were you like snoring? Why were you sleeping like that? Like a putujjana, drooling in these different body postures on your bed. And the bed would just be basically on the ground and sleeping on their robes and things. Where's your mindfulness? And how come you were not practicing past 9 p.m.? Yeah, it says, let's say, that each monastery, each group of monks might have a different time, let's say, as to when to go to sleep. But ultimately, everybody is encouraged to practice as much as they can. Sometimes not even sleep at all, not even a wink. And that brings us back to adhitthana, that determination, that persevering energy, virya, to maintain sila, to bring yourself constantly back to sati. Okay, I missed those 10 hours of my life, completely unaware, completely mindless, heedless. That's okay, that's in the past. Let me bring sati here now. You still have that gold coin, by the way, every time you're mindful. But spend this life with some meaningfulness. That could be another word for sati. Life is short. Death is waiting for all of us. Nobody's going to get out of here alive. Mindfulness is the key to the deathless, is the way to the deathless. There's no other way. And that was the goal that Lord Buddha had. He wasn't just teaching dukkha, he was teaching nirodha, the release, the cessation, the ending of dukkha. That's the Eightfold Path. These are not just some teachings, some stuff that we can learn, memorize from some book or hear about. These are not, those are dead things as far as I'm concerned. And the only place for them to come alive is in your life, nobody else's. So let's become intimate with every gesture we make. Let's add accountability to them, because nothing is meaningless. Nothing we do is meaningless. So I will pause here and see if there are any thoughts, comments, questions. Of course, again, about the Dhamma and the practice. I hope you find or you found that to be somewhat useful, and it could enhance your practice further. I know one of you was mentioning the other day how after sitting meditation, whether it was, let's say, the sutta explorations we do bi-weekly or these normal regular sittings, 2 hours, the mind gets to get calm and tranquil and find stability, which is another word for samadhi, by the way. It's very difficult for the mind to really conjure up some questions. And in fact, my job is to give the floor or to provide a setting where if there are questions or comments or unclear areas, then they would be brought forth and we can excuse me, address it as needed. However, in all fairness to your practice and where the mind is going, as it's resting and resting and resting and finding more and more space in this room, it's getting decluttered. It's actually a good thing when the questions are reduced. If they're not something that's being imposed upon yourself, by yourself, meaning I'm not going to ask a question that I have. No, I think you understand what I'm trying to say. There needs to be that tranquility if we were authentically sitting through it. And when Lord Buddha would be giving talks, his desanas, the whole Sangha would be there. And oftentimes, if not always, everybody was extremely aware as to what bodily noises they might be making. So even a cough, the way I've been coughing annoyingly, it would be annoying then, because there are stories where the fellow bhikkhus would nudge with their elbow the other bhikkhu who kind of gently coughed or cleared his throat, let alone asking a question. But I think we're all very, very grateful for questions to have been asked at the time of Lord Buddha, because thanks to them, we have the Nikayas, most of the Nikayas, most of the suttas, because somebody said or did something that necessitated Lord Buddha to give a discourse, or his Arya Savakas, his noble disciples, to give a discourse. So there are, there's a tremendous value in asking questions. However, I also understand when we reach a point where, let me sit with this. And to that point, if you have the ability or perhaps even the luxury of, for those of you in parts of the world where you don't have to go to sleep. I know some of you have been up since 2 a.m. for you, or 1 a.m., or even earlier, maybe like 12 or 11 p.m. You're going to go to sleep right after this. But the rest of you who are going to go about the rest of your day, see the quality of the mind when it is clashing with certain events, conversations, people, events, and see how much of that tranquility you're cognizant of. Don't try to hold on to it, of course, but just be aware of. Again, I'm going back to sati. That's what I'm referring to, as you know. So just a few more words in that regard. Are there any questions, comments?
Bhante,
yes.
may I ask a question? Yes. If I don't want to ask a question, it's not because my mind is so tranquil that I don't have a question. It's usually the other way around. I'm not sure the question is worth asking and that I should know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. So I know that you always teach us to take care of ourselves first and not to think that, get distracted by all the things around us, because these things are endless, things that are like injustice, whatever, it's endless. So we have to first take care of ourselves first. Now, as a teacher myself and as someone who writes, I just wonder, do I have a responsibility when there's some really outrageous thing that is being suppressed and that I not try to spread it to the world? Or is that also like, no, you just focus on yourself, don't try to expose things that are really painful, unbearable, unjust, and really like analogous to treating a human being like an animal?
Well, the suppression that's coming, that you mentioned, is that your suppression or somebody else's?
It's a national suppression.
Say it again.
National suppression.
National or natural? I didn't understand.
Yes, that's why it can be suppressed. No one can suppress anything these days, right? With the media and all that.
Yes.
Unless it's like the nation that is putting
the nation is
a blanket on something that is horrible.
The nation or the world or the universe, as far as this practice is concerned, as far as your true, genuine happiness is concerned, is all loka, meaning the world. Even when the body gets sick, that's part of the world. Because if you go ahead and try to plug those holes, meaning the national suppression, whatever it is, okay, let's say we plugged it. You think that's going to stop? There's going to be something else that shows up. Then there's going to be something else. There's going to be something else everywhere, all the time. In that sense, it's a futile affair, ultimately, to be putting your attention now in the West, or actually it's spread like a wildfire everywhere in the world, pretty much. People want to do something, and that doing something has to do with the world, instead of doing the most essential work, which actually takes more courage, which is to sit down and face your own demons, your own kileshas. It's a lot easier to go and march and protest things like that. That's why, again, the questions and the comments, when I encourage you to ask, are always supposed to be geared towards the practice. However, given the world that we're living in, I know these questions would come up years ago or even some months ago. I've talked about them so often. And I'm not going to be giving you a different answer, because ultimately, the world doesn't matter, essentially. What matters is what you're doing with the world, what you're doing with that sense of suppression. You're not sticking your head in the sand and saying, oh, there's like closing your ears and this is not happening. No, 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 no. That's not, that is denial. That is even indifference. That's not the path. That's not the Dhamma. So there is an involvement. That's why when you practice sati, you're practicing sila, you are practicing protection. Protection of yourself and protection of those around you, including the world, including the animals. Now, when you see animals being slaughtered, or humans, let's not even go to animals, humans. I've seen people, I've seen mounds of burnt human bodies when I was 8. Human bodies. People. I've seen teddy bears that were burning still when I got to that site. With my family, we were all shaking and crying to witness such a horrific thing. People had done that to people, you know. Now, you can hold that, carry that, become stigmatized with that, traumatized with that, and then want to go and fix the world. Well, that also has some subtle levels of ego and subtle levels of, well, basically, not just subtle, ignorance, basically, because you are delaying what needs to be done. First of all, there is an ignorance of kamma. In our culture of individuality, of this, oh, I can go and change the world, all that nonsense, I know it's shocking for Western cultures and all that to hear that even. Of course you can change the world. No, you can't. If you want to change the world, you start from here. That is where the miracle, the only miracles could happen, here in the transformation of yourself, nobody else. So when the person is working on themselves through sila, they're protecting themselves. Why? Because they're aware of the importance of kamma, action. Now, action has consequences. It has its own weight to be borne by the person who committed them. There's different levels of kamma. There's some kamma that are immediate. Let's say you touch you reach into the fireplace when it's burning. That kammic result is immediate. You step off a ledge or you fall off a ledge and there's gravity. That's immediate kamma. The consequence is immediate to that action. Now, there are some actions that take a longer time. They might take days, months, years, or a lifetime. But there are, I would say, majority of actions that will take much longer time, which means you will face the consequences of your actions because nothing's going to go to waste. Remember the laws of thermodynamics? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. That's what we're talking about here as well. Action puts out an energy, and that's your energy. And it's like a pebble you threw into the lake, and it's going to come back at you. So whether it's the animal, whether it's the human being who's suffering something, the kammic relevancy should not be taken out. Should be at least considered by the viewer, by the person who's witnessing this. And plus, there's the other element that many people don't even give a second's of thought to, especially when it's regarding animals or other beings who are being slaughtered, who are being killed, and humans, of course. But especially, let's talk about the animals briefly. The only way that that animal might have actually lived a very virtuous life in at least one lifetime as a human, or even as an animal. But that moment of death, in whatever way it is, might be their jumping board into being reborn as a human being. And you standing there to stop that or to completely lose yourself over that act, which is horrific to begin with. Because the animal is suffering. We need to be able to pull back and look at the grand scheme of things. And the Dhamma allows us to be doing that. But the ego that we have, the attachments of our idealistic ways of thinking, that I want to do this, I want to change this, Again, we're going outside from what really matters. That's laziness. Laziness. Not to work on yourself and start to work on others first, fixing society. Well, if you have that much courage, go ahead and sit down in your room and actually fix yourself by at least sitting there for 1 hour without moving. See if you can do that. Or if you're not moving, then see how many times you're actually having angry thoughts come in, or dullness, or restlessness, or sleepiness. And see how many excuses you make about those things. That takes courage, not protesting. You can protest if you actually have your business taken care of in your heart. Your kileshas are under watch by you. There's so many beautiful ways of protesting, and people are doing it today. I always encourage people to have the right mind. What is my attitude when I'm doing this, when I am stopping this person from doing this, or wanting to stop them from doing this? Where is my drive coming from? So again, you notice I'm always pointing the finger, the attention, the magnifying glass back at the person, at you. Because the mind, it's the easiest thing in the world, because the world is, as you said, the world will never run out of problems. Never. As Janusoni was asking Lord Buddha, will there be a time, Lord, where the hell realms will be empty of all the people who are suffering in them, where the animal realms will be emptied of all the animals in them, when the hungry ghosts, the petas, will be emptied from all the petas? The Buddha said, no. They will never be emptied out. Don't worry about that. Just be concerned about one thing. Get yourself out of samsara, cycle of rebirth. Because coming back to that animal who's dying, who's being killed, their next birth, which they have been really eager to experience and do or continue or finish their work, might be a human birth. People don't even consider that, because we are so fixated on this life and that's it. And that is a very nihilistic way of thinking, which the Western culture, Western ways of thinking, which is permeated all over the world, is geared towards now. Nihilistic, meaning after this, that's it. So now is what I can actually manage to really pay attention to and do something about. Completely oblivious of what is happening. Contextual gaze there is not there to look at the different layers of this being's life. I mean, this person, this cow was not always a cow, you know. There's a reason why they're a cow. A cockroach is a cockroach because there's many reasons for them to end up there. A child that is being born deformed or with a big hole in their heart, or with some physical deformity, is not because some being out there dictates, deems that to be so. None at all. Sometimes we're carrying a lot of our own thoughts and ideas from our own, let's say, cultures or religions, if we're coming from a different religion, let's say, compared to the Dhamma. And that smudges the Dhamma. Not the Dhamma, but the way we see the Dhamma, I mean. So we need to look at the grand scheme of things, because that cow is not going to just stay a cow. You have been a cow, so have I. Many, many times we have seen, we have felt the cut of the knife slitting our throats. Many times. Not just that. Our loved ones too. In front of our eyes. So it's not just unique to this cow that I'm witnessing being slaughtered. And that is the way that a being is always moving about in samsara. So energy is not being wasted as such, if you want to look at it as, in that way. So I hope that kind of clarifies or helps with where you were coming from.
Clarify a little bit what I'm asking. I have never thought to save the world or fix the world at all. But I'm just asking the question about at what point do we feel that we should follow our empathy, or can empathy also be problematic? Because what I mean is that when you see, it's one thing if someone is being murdered, but it's another thing when you see someone being kind of treated as worse than an animal day after day after day for 10 years, 12 years, 20 years. So when you see something like that, if it's the person is next to me, chances are that, I'll definitely call the police or say that, there's something like that. I may not fix it myself, but when someone is far, far away and the news is being known, and I know that, this person is suffering, do I not have seeing that, not just turn to myself, worry about my own thing, as opposed to telling people about it, telling people who are there, because the people who are there cannot, they were very angry, but everything they say are being suppressed. So I just feel, do I not have any responsibility to let people know, or should I just not spend the time? So it's totally not about fixing the world, participating in any protest. If anything, I don't want to. In other words, I really much rather that someone can just save this person without, even putting it in the news. But in this case, it's not possible. So what can I do? Or should I do anything? It's still focused on the self, or
It's interesting why, how, when you say a way to save this person, we say it in passing, and we don't realize the signatures, the emotional signatures that we attribute to it, personal signature from our own. There's an involvement. Remember the identification that I refer to a lot? This is mine, this is my pain because I'm witnessing you in pain. Now, this ties in with what you were asking right there in the beginning of what you said just now, as far as, is there a time where empathy can lead us or pull us away from, etc. I'm not doing what you said justice, but basically empathy, can it be a cause for harm or some type of an agitation in the mind? No. Empathy, when it leans into identification, then it has elements of affection, and it has elements of ego, like I was referring to earlier. It has definitely chunks and chunks of expectations. Sorry about the person behind me is mowing the lawn, so if it comes out, and so I'm going to try to speak even despite that. So empathy, if it's genuine empathy, it doesn't have any strings attached. That's one. Meaning it doesn't have expectations. Okay, it's like generosity. Generosity can be somebody giving money to someone and expecting the person to be doing or saying or behaving in a certain way. That's expectation. That is another form of strings being attached to this act. If you're being generous, your generous act or generosity has to be within the confines of your intention to be generous, period. Don't lean into, okay, this needs to happen, that needs to happen. Now, having said that, you need to also be aware that there are things you can do. There are ways that you can announce it to the world. Hey, this person is fallen. This person is in pain. There's nothing wrong. In fact, it's highly encouraged for you to reach out to those people that you know that can be assisting this person. So the Dhamma is not, again, about indifference. None of that. Absolutely. The Dhamma is the most engaged practice in human history. The Dhamma. There's no strings attached. None. That's why metta is completely different than what you hear about non-violence and things, let's say in Jainism. Later on, you saw that embodied basically in Gandhi. That's non-violence, it's not metta. Because when I am starving myself, I'm going into a fast to kill myself, basically, starve. that might generate pain in you. That might generate pain in millions of people, perhaps, like the case was 60, 80 years ago. I'm causing you pain now. Where's the wholesomeness in that? You remember what I was saying about the sasana? Not to do anything that's bad, doing something that is good and purifying the mind. So sati has to be there in my intentionality, in my position, in looking at you suffering here. And can I do something about it? And what is it? Without me losing my empathy, because I can still be extremely empathetic, being fully present for you, but at the same time, responsible enough to be wise enough to be seeing what this action that I'm going to do, what is it going to be resulting in? Is it now going to create turmoil in someone else's life because I want to save this person? I want to save, using your word, this person. Something that I could share with you is something I've actually experienced myself about 2 years ago when I went to Armenia, the land of my ancestors, as people might call it, and to take the Dhamma there, proper Buddhism there, as a monk. And apparently I was the first Theravadan Buddhist monk in Armenian history. I didn't know this. I get there, 3 days later, guess what happens? Azerbaijan attacks Armenia, a poor little country with hardly 3 million people. Economy is so bad, this and that. Part of the culture, obviously, is inducing the sense of like, okay, we have to do something about it. You had countless people, young people, getting on buses to go to the front line to save the country from being whatever, invaded, and people were dying. Of course, being there, having empathy, seeing the suffering of the people, plus 3 days I'm there and the war started. And I'm like, okay, should I go back or should I leave the country? I was like, wait a minute. Could I be useful here with all the skills and things that I could actually share with them? I'm a monk. I could share. I'm also a psychotherapist. I'm a practitioner. I'm a clinician. So I can maybe help. So looking at your capacity as a person to be assisting in ameliorating, in easing the suffering of the person is something that is highly encouraged. That is the element of engaged Dhamma, engaged Buddhism. And I would also see people come because I restarted my practice as a clinician there because I saw how much need there was, because people were dying from all these drones that were dropping bombs in villages, and people were just standing. So I would see those families that had 2 or 3 members of their family dying like that. I would see them as patients now, who are sitting there talking to me in Armenian, because I speak the language, but I was not trying to be a Buddhist monk there. I simply had to be there as a human being listening and making space, a safe space for empathy to touch and heal. There were people vowing vengeance and this and that. I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to fight until, even if they kill us all, I'm going to die defending, very basic human drives. And you would also feel that as well, of course. You're a human being. But I saw how useful would that be? Would it be useful? So there's different ways that you can actually assist. So I saw how it was necessary for me to calm and ease their suffering. One gentleman had come having been wounded. He has fresh wounds. And his fiance brought him in. And he was very jittery. He didn't like He never, again, it's Buddhism is totally foreign to them. He comes in and he's shaking. He's not sure. Is he going to get mad at me? Should he get mad at me? All these things. And then I start speaking to him. Suddenly he starts calming down. And then this very nervous, on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being extremely anxious, worried, hypervigilant, 0 being completely calm, this person dropped down to about a 3 or a 2. And he was thanking me, he was smiling. And then he goes. And then 2 weeks later, I find out that he was actually, one of these drones dropped a bomb. And he lost one eye and he lost a portion of his foot. But he didn't apparently lose his sanity. Why? Because apparently something had happened to him 2 weeks earlier, where he started to equate what was happening in the world, all these injustices. And this fiance that he had, he was thinking, I don't deserve her. I don't deserve her. Because I'm no longer complete. I don't have an eye, my shoulder is messed up, my foot is gone. She's young, she could find a better, healthy person maybe. But no. Whatever tools that they had been provided with, apparently it worked. Because they got married and they have a baby on the way. And they're so happy that during that chaos, and this is one example, which I'm disclosing here selectively, as we say in clinical terms. It's wonderful when you are coming from a quiet, calm state, how empathy can really go leaps and bounds beyond your own imagination as to what it is capable of doing. It is truly miraculous. It is truly miraculous. Of course, on the side, I was also keeping family and friends and practitioners and students aware of what was happening in Armenia at that time, because apparently the whole mass media, mainstream media, was not covering a single tiny little millisecond of what was the hell that was happening there. Talk about injustice, which can cause a person to really become agitated in the mind. How unfair is that? Nobody knows about this. How could that be? 21st century, but it was happening. So there's other ways that you can let people know without vilifying the so-called enemy. That's key. That has to be said. And one technique would be, if I were to be seeing the person who's in charge of hitting the button or giving the call for thousands of people to die. I mean, there were about 7,000 or 10,000 young men who died needlessly. Armenian men who died. There were probably same amount on the other side. But the person who started this, if that person came up to me, how would my behavior be towards them? Would I look at them as a villain? That is where your empathy counts. That is where your Dhamma counts. Because as Lord Buddha says in Kakachupama Sutta, in the saw, the simile of the saw, he says, even if there were people who came in and start to use a massive, huge saw, excuse me, two-handled saw on you, cutting you in half without anesthesia. If you were to have any tiny little small thought of hatred towards any one of them, you're not practicing what I taught you. Now, the challenge was placed in front of us by Lord Buddha 2,600 years ago. How many of us are actually able to uphold that? So if I were to see that villain, what would my attitude be? would I look at him as the way I look at my niece, for example, or my nephew, or my student, or my teacher? That indicates clearly where I am standing as far as virtue is concerned, as far as the purity of my heart. And I would invite you to look at whether it's empathy, equanimity, or any of these beautiful states that we experience through the Dhamma. How are they being viewed in my living experience? And that way you can actually keep the Dhamma alive instead of turning into something heady, idealistic, idealistic, romantic. No, it's very real. And there are a lot of people on the ground level, on a grassroots level, who go and help. If you really want to help, I encourage people to go to these places. Go to Africa, go to Myanmar, go to any place that you know that injustices or harm or poverty or something is there that's not sitting well with you, and do something about it. But while you're doing it, always check your attitude. Are you coming from the three defilements, from the kileshas? If you are, a lot of people have been called saints in this world in the last couple of centuries. But when you look and probe into the nature of what they really did, the impact they had around them, you'd be shocked, because there was a lot of hatred in their hearts. In the name of compassion, in the name of this or that lofty ideal. So there's a lot of accountability to be, that we need to bear. That's why every gesture we make must have accountability with the stamp approval, if you will, of sati. So I hope that helps.
No, it is extremely helpful, especially your example about Armenia. I think exactly you touch on a very important point, because I feel that when I kind of share the news with people, they get so angry as they say, I want to do this and that. And that's really not my intention. But, you just have to, but by saying that, let's not kind of think about, condemning this and that person, but actually what you can do to help this person, maybe not to save, but to improve her condition, to do something for this person. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Of course.
Good question. Are there other questions?
Bhante, I just have a quick question. You touched on the comment or the question a monk asked the Buddha about, will the hell realms ever be emptied? And the Buddha said no. Did you give a reference to a sutta for that? I have an interest in that particular topic, and I did a quick search on Google and nothing came up. Make it easy for me. And
of course, yes. It was not a monk. It was Janusoni. I think it was the same Janusoni who was also responsible for the medicine. So he would be attentive to providing medicine and medical attention. I believe it was the same. But it's from the numerical discourses, Anguttara Nikaya. I've already translated it. It's recorded on the YouTube, but I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, the Book of Fours or the Book of Fives, one of them, and it's one of the decimals, like tens. They go in tens, so I know it was completing that group of 10. What I'll do is I'll actually I'll find it and well, actually I can just put it in the description, underneath the description of this recording on YouTube, so that way, would that work?
That will work for everyone, yes.
Yeah. Well, excellent.
Who has a similar answer. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It was actually an eye-opening sutta for me, because as if Janusoni was from the 21st century, and there was a dialogue that was happening right there in normal contemporary scene for us. where his question was, Bhante, to Lord Buddha, all these offerings that we're making and we're sharing with our loved ones that have passed, does it reach them, or who gets benefits from it? And Lord Buddha actually beautifully delineates the different layers of existence, or different realms of existence, where let's say a deva really doesn't need our sharing of merits, or a being in hell is unable to receive, in a sense, as well as a peta, a hungry ghost. He points them out as the best, I guess, the right, the most appropriate class of beings to really absorb, like sponges, the merits that we give, whether it's an offering of a meal we make to a monk, or to an altar, an apple, something, a glass of water, and you're offering it to Lord Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha, but you're also making room, opening the doors and spaces, if you will, for these other beings who are starving, who are in destitute, because they might have had relatives back in the eons that, when they had just become petas. And those relatives might have died and gone, so they no longer have any person who knows about them even, let alone make an offering specifically, let's say, for this ancestor or that. So Lord Buddha says, just make it like, I hate to trivialize it by using this word, like wholesale. Make it available for all beings, especially the petas from all the different realms, from all the different eons that are still struggling. And they're in pain, especially because they don't have anybody remembering them, which is truly, truly unimaginably painful, one can assume. And they're hungry on top of that. So it is very much like being in hell, but you're not in that much pain, but you're in extreme pain constantly, nevertheless. So Janusoni Sutta, and it's spelled with J, Janusoni, and I'll make sure I'll put that in the bottom of the description for you all. Any other thoughts, questions?
Bhante, as you were talking, I had the thought that might you be speaking about Jivaka, since you said the doctor.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that correction. It was not the doctor. That's Jivaka. My bad. So many, and I'm horrible with memory. I apologize. So Janusoni is the name, and he was a wealthy individual, and Jivaka was the doctor. Thank you, Dhammadina, for that correction. Janusoni, again, the order is the same though. It's from Numerical Discourses, and it's the 10th of a 10 series suttas. And I think book of 4 or 5. 5s. Excellent. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay. So let us do the dedication of merits, nevertheless, for all beings. And the Devas and Nagas doesn't mean that they don't appreciate this. They really love it. I mean, wouldn't you love it when someone actually has you in their mind, especially if they never have seen you, never, or know you, but somehow they are making you part of their busy schedule, especially after we have accrued so much good merits from the practice of purifying the mind, of doing something good and abstaining ourselves from doing bad things, unwholesome things. It really, really is unimaginably rewarding. And that reward we're sharing with all these beings. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May the triple gem bless you. But remember, the blessing is not going to come from outside. Like the magnet to all blessings comes from you first being mindful and therefore practicing sila. And every time we're practicing goodness, by even if we're looking at our own hearts and seeing the goodness we have, recognizing even that tiny little bit of goodness in all the mire that we think that we have, even if we can recognize that, that is doing good and that is not doing bad. And that is the beginning of purifying the mind. That itself will open the doors for the blessings. Remember, the Lord Buddha hesitated to give the Dhamma. We're so glad he did. Let's make use of it and enter through the doors of the deathless. As Brahma Sahampati, who came in to convince and persuade and was successful in persuading Lord Buddha to see that in fact there are beings with little dust in their eyes, that they will make do, they will make the most, and in fact they will even become arahants like Lord Buddha. He was so jubilant afterwards. He said, the doors of the deathless are now open, repeating what Lord Buddha has said. So let us see where this road takes us. And the only way to do that is through the heart, your own, with accountability, living life with accountability, with trust and softness. May you be well, and we'll see you next week for the Sutta Exploration Series, and it will be on the Saupadisesa Sutta, which is the discourse on with residues remaining. It's a very good sutta, which I believe is going to be very helpful for you and your practice. Be well, and I'll see you next week.